The hill outside Chiang Mai does not appear on any tourist map. You reach it by taking a road that stops being paved about 3 kilometers before the compound appears, then another kilometer of dirt track through teak trees that filter the afternoon light into something amber and particular. The compound at the top is not impressive by any standard a visitor from outside Thailand would apply to it. Low wooden buildings arranged around a central training area, the wood darkened by decades of rain and heat, a spirit house near the entrance, offerings fresh, roosters somewhere in the trees, the sound of bare feet on packed earth. This is where Kru Sombat Therawat has been teaching Muay Thai for 61 years. He is 83 years old. He has been training in this discipline since he was 7. He has produced 11 national champions, 4 of whom went on to compete internationally, and 2 of whom won at international level. He does not advertise this. He does not have a sign outside the compound. Students find him through the specific network by which serious students find serious teachers in Thailand, which is through other serious students and teachers, and the quiet word of people who know the difference. He is 5'4" and weighs perhaps 130 pounds. He moves through the compound with the specific unhurried quality of someone who has been in this space for so long that the space has accommodated itself to them rather than the other way around. His face carries 61 years of teaching inside it, every line earned from something real. The 3 young students who are doing their afternoon training when the car arrives at the bottom of the hill are between 18 and 22 years old. Their Thai names are Nong, Chai, and Prichia. They have been training here for between 1 and 3 years. They are serious students, serious enough to be here on a hill outside the city when their friends are doing other things with their afternoons. They see the car arrive and they see who gets out of it, and they react the way 20-year-olds react when someone they have only seen on a screen materializes in front of them in a physical reality, which is with a specific quality of surprised noise that is mostly involuntary. Bruce Lee is in Thailand for film meetings in Bangkok that ended 2 days ago, and he has been traveling since then, specifically looking for things to see and people to learn from, which is what he does whenever a schedule creates space to do it. A contact in Bangkok mentioned Kru Sombat. Another contact confirmed him. A third contact drew a map. Bruce gets out of the car, and the 3 young students make their noise, and then, recovering themselves, tell him in rapidly improving English that he has arrived at the right place, that this is the school of Kru Sombat Therawat, and that they are very honored, very happy, very surprised. He thanks them. He asks if their teacher is available to receive a visitor. They go to find him. Subscribe right now. Because what Kru Sombat says when he hears who has arrived is the thing that makes everything that follows possible. Kru Sombat is watching Nong's footwork when the other 2 appear at the edge of the training area with an expression he has learned to read across decades of teaching, the expression young people wear when something has excited them that they believe their teacher should also find exciting. He lets Nong finish the sequence, then he looks at Chai and Pricha. Chai says, in Thai, "Teacher, there is a visitor, an important one." Sombat says, "There are no unimportant visitors." Pricha says, "Bruce Lee is here." Sombat looks at him. He says, "Who?" They explain. The films, the Green Hornet television series, the demonstrations, the style called Jeet Kune Do, the way his name has been spreading across the martial arts world internationally. As they explain, something moves through Sombat's expression that is not what they expected. They expected recognition, perhaps some version of the interest an old master might take in a young practitioner who had become famous. They do not get that. What they get is something closer to displeasure. Sombat says, in Thai, "The man from the Hollywood films." Chai says, "Yes, teacher, he is very skilled." Many people say, Sombat says, many people say many things. Most of what many people say is shaped by what they have seen on a screen. He looks at the training area, at the packed earth that 61 years of students have trained on, and then he looks at his hands. He says, "This art has existed for centuries. It was built by people who had nothing except what their bodies could learn and what they could pass on to the next generation. It does not need a Hollywood film to give it credibility." He pauses. What Hollywood does is take what is real and make it into something entertaining. Entertainment is not the same as the real thing. When someone from that world comes here, they usually want to take something, not to give something, not to genuinely learn something. Pricha says carefully, "Teacher, perhaps this one is different." Sombat says, "Perhaps." He says it in the tone of someone who considers the possibility genuinely unlikely, but is not prepared to dismiss it before testing it. He says, "Send him up." Bruce walks up the dirt track with the same quality of presence he carries everywhere, unhurried and paying attention. The compound reveals itself gradually through the trees, and by the time he arrives at the entrance, he has already read the space, the layout, the condition of the training area, the age of the wooden structures, and what the age says about the continuity of what happens here. He sees the spirit house and pauses. He makes an appropriate gesture of respect. This is not performance. He has been in enough traditional spaces, in enough countries, to understand what these things mean to the people for whom they are not decorative. Crew Sombat is standing in the training area. He does not come to meet Bruce at the entrance. He is standing in the center of the packed earth, with his arms at his sides, watching Bruce cross the compound toward him. Bruce approaches and stops at the appropriate distance and brings his hands together and bows. The formal bow of someone who has learned enough about the context to know what the gesture means here. Sombat does not return it. He looks at Bruce with the expression he had when the students described who was at the bottom of the hill, the one that is not quite hostility, but contains the preconditions for it. Bruce straightens. He looks at Sombat. He recognizes the non-returned bow for what it is, because he knows what it means, and he does not react to it with the wounded pride that most people would produce automatically. Instead, he does what he does with most things, which is try to understand it. He says, in the careful Thai he has been developing over the past several days, I apologize if I have come at an inconvenient time. Sombat says, in English, that is more precise than most people expect from someone of his age and background. Your Thai is good for 3 days. Bruce says, I try to learn quickly. Sombat says, what do you want here? Wood says, I want to learn. Sombat says, Hollywood people come to Thailand to take things they can use in their productions. They call it learning. They leave with something for the camera. The discipline itself does not gain anything from the transaction. Bruce says, that's a fair concern. Sombat says, it is not a concern. It is an observation based on experience. He says, you have made films about martial arts. Many people have seen these films. They believe, because they have seen the films, that they understand something about martial arts. They do not understand martial arts. They understand films. He says, that misrepresentation has consequences. Students arrive at schools expecting what they saw on the screen. They are disappointed by the reality, which is that real training is slow and difficult and unglamorous, and most of it is boring from the outside. They leave. The school loses them. The discipline loses them, because a film gave them an expectation that the discipline cannot and should not meet. Bruce says, I hear that. Sombat says, do you accept it? Bruce says, I accept that it happens. I am less certain it is always my film that causes it. Sombat looks at him. He says, an honest answer. He says, what do you know about Muay Thai? Bruce says, I know its history better than most people who haven't trained in it. I know the 8 weapons. I know the conditioning philosophy, and why it produces the specific kind of durability it produces. I know the clinch work and why the knees from the clinch are the most dangerous technique in the system in close range. I know the teep as a range management tool rather than just an attack. I know something about the sarama and what the music means in the context of a match. He pauses. I know I don't know what someone who has been doing this for 60 years knows. Sombat is quiet for a moment. He looks at the training area. He says, what do you want to learn that you cannot learn from what you already know? Bruce says, I want to know what the system knows that I can't read from the outside. The internal experience of it, what it feels like to receive the techniques from someone who has mastered them. You can study the theory of something from a distance and have an accurate map, but still not know what the territory actually is. He says, the map is not the territory. I know the map. I want to understand the territory. Sombat says, you want me to hit you. Bruce says, I want you to teach me. If that involves hitting me, then yes. Sombat looks at him for a long moment. He says, you are 31 years old. I am 83. If I hit you seriously, you will not enjoy it. Bruce says, probably not. Sombat says, and if I do not hit you seriously, you will not learn what you came to learn. Bruce says, also true. Sombat says, you are smaller than most of my students. Bruce says, I'm aware. Sombat says, the techniques I have do not require the practitioner to be large. They require the recipient to be honest about what they have received. Bruce says, I will be honest. Sombat turns away and walks toward the equipment area at the edge of the training space. He returns with hand wraps and pads. He sets them on the ground between them. He says, my students will observe. They will learn as much from watching you receive as from anything else I could show them today. He looks at Bruce. He says, the first time you are knocked down, you will want to tell yourself it was something specific, a particular technique that caught you at a particular moment. This is how pride protects itself. He says, by the 4th time you will stop telling yourself that story. By the 7th time, if you are still standing up, you will understand something. He says, let's find out if you are the kind of man who keeps standing up. Like this video. Not for any algorithm. Because the next section is the thing that made Bruce Lee different from every other martial artist of his era, and you need to see it to understand why. The three young students have positioned themselves at the edge of the training area. They are very still, which is unusual for them. They have trained under Sombat for between 1 and 3 years, and they have never seen him agree to work with a visitor before. They are not entirely sure what they are about to witness, and the uncertainty has made them attentive in a way that ordinary training sessions don't quite produce. Bruce wraps his hands. He does this with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been doing it for years, and Sombat watches the wrapping with the attention of someone who reads information from details like that. They move to the center of the training area. Sombat adopts a stance that does not look like a fighting stance in any conventional sense. He is standing in a way that looks relaxed and almost casual, his weight settled, his hands not raised in any guard, his expression the same expression he wears walking through the compound. The stance of someone who has been doing this long enough that readiness and rest are the same thing. Bruce stands in his own way, the non-stance that is a stance, balanced and present, and not committed to any particular next action. Sombat says, "Begin whenever you are ready." Bruce moves first. He comes forward with a teep, the push kick, aimed at testing distance and reading how Sombat moves in response to pressure. Sombat moves sideways, a small precise step, and his left hand deflects the teep's line with a touch that is so minimal it is almost invisible. But the deflection adds a small component to the kick's direction that puts Bruce's weight commitment slightly off from where he expected to be when the kick returned. In that fractional imbalance, Sombat's right elbow comes in. It is a short movement, compact, the elbow describing maybe 12 inches of arc. But it is thrown with the hip rotation of someone who has been throwing elbows correctly since before Bruce was born, and it catches Bruce across the top of the left shoulder and into the neck with a force that his weight, still slightly off, cannot fully absorb. Bruce goes down. He goes down on one hand and one knee, and the packed earth comes up and meets him with the specific reality of packed earth that has been there for 61 years and has no opinion about who it receives. He is down for 2 seconds. He gets up. Sombat has not moved from where the elbow ended. He is standing at the end of the motion, watching Bruce come up, his expression unchanged. He says, "Your weight was still in the teep when the elbow arrived. You committed to the kick and could not redistribute before the contact." Bruce says, "Yes, I felt that." Sombat says, "The teep is a distance tool, not just a weapon. When it becomes a committed attack rather than a probe, it costs you the weight." Bruce says, "I know the principle." Sombat says, "You know the principle. You do not yet own it." He says, "Again." Bruce comes again. This time he uses the teep differently, lighter, more genuinely probing, trying to apply what the first exchange showed him. Sombat reads the adjustment. He moves forward into the teep rather than sideways, taking away the distance the teep was designed to create, and his right knee comes up from the clinch range that the forward movement has created. The knee finds Bruce's midsection before he has fully accounted for Sombat having closed rather than retreated. The air leaves Bruce's body in the specific way it leaves when a knee from a Muay Thai master finds the solar plexus. He folds slightly. Sombat's left hand guides his shoulder, and the fold becomes a controlled descent. Bruce is on the ground again. Second time. He gets up. His breathing is working harder than it was. He puts one hand briefly on his midsection, pressing once, assessing. Then he raises his hands. Sombat says, "You expected me to retreat from the teep." Bruce says, "Yes." Sombat says, "Why?" Bruce says, "Because the teep is designed to create distance." Sombat says, "The teep is designed to control distance." Control means choosing the distance, not always increasing it. When you commit to the teep's distance-creating function, you do not consider that the response to it can be to close the distance instead. He says, "You know this." Bruce says, "Intellectually, yes." Sombat says, "The body does not yet know it." He says, "The body learns differently than the mind. The mind can hold a principle, and the body can still not own it. The only way the body learns is through repetition, under real conditions. Correction, under real conditions." He gestures at the training area. He says, "This is the classroom. The packed earth is the teacher. Every time you go down, the earth is teaching you something the mind hasn't fully given the body yet." Bruce says, "Then I'm still in the early part of the lesson." Sombat says, "Yes." He says, "Again." The third time Bruce goes down is from a combination that begins with a jab that seems exploratory and becomes something else in the middle of becoming it. Sombat's right hand comes behind the jab before Bruce has finished processing the jab, and the right hand carries the full rotation of someone who has been doing this for 76 years, and it catches Bruce on the chin with enough force to take his feet out from under him completely. He goes down flat this time, back and shoulder blades and the packed earth simultaneously. He lies there for 4 seconds. The three young students have stopped breathing. Nong has his hands over his mouth. Chai and Precha are very still. Bruce gets up. He stands and shakes his head once, the specific head shake of someone clearing something, and raises his hands. Sombat says, "The jab was not the attack." Bruce says, "No, it was the setup." Sombat says, "When you processed the jab as the attack, you were already behind. The right hand had been decided before the jab left my shoulder." Bruce says, "The preparation." Sombat says, "I decided on the right hand, and then I threw the jab. The jab was the second decision. You saw the second decision first." He says, "What is the first signal that tells you the right hand has been decided?" Bruce says slowly, "The right hip, it loads before the jab is thrown." Sombat says, "Yes." Bruce says, "The jab masks the hip load." Sombat says, "The jab creates something for your eyes to follow. While your eyes follow the jab, the hip finishes loading, and the right hand becomes inevitable." He says, "What should you have watched?" Bruce says, "The hip, not the hands." Sombat says, "Yes, the hands are what everyone watches. The hip is what tells you what the hands are going to do before they do it." He says, "You know this principle too." Bruce says, "I do." Sombat says, "But your eyes still went to the jab." Bruce says, "Yes." Sombat says, "Because knowing the principle and having the body practice the principle for long enough that it operates without the mind's interference are different things." He looks at Bruce. He says, "How many years have you trained?" Bruce says, 19. Sombat says, "I have trained for 76. The difference between 19 and 76 is not a matter of more of the same thing. It is a different quality of the same thing. The principles are the same. What is different is how completely the body owns them." He says, again, "Subscribe if you're still here." The fourth and fifth knockdowns are the ones that change what this story is about. The fourth knockdown comes from a direction Bruce does not account for. Sombat has been working from the front, from predictable angles, from the locations that the training exchanges so far have established as the source of what is coming. The fourth attack comes from a step that takes Sombat completely outside Bruce's lead shoulder, an angle that requires Bruce to turn before he can respond, and the elbow that arrives as he turns finds his left ear with the specific force of something that has been set up over 3 exchanges. Bruce goes down hard. Left side, catching himself on one hand, he is down for 6 seconds this time. When he comes up, his left ear is red. Not cut, but red. Sombat says, "You had become comfortable with the angle of my attacks." Bruce says, "Yes, I was reading them from the front." Sombat says, "Comfort is the enemy of learning. The moment you become comfortable with what an opponent is doing is the moment they change it." He says, "How long were you comfortable?" Bruce says, "I started to feel comfortable after the 3rd exchange." Sombat says, "I noticed." Bruce says, "You were waiting." Sombat says, "I was teaching." The 4th technique was the lesson that the first 3 created the conditions for. He says, "You cannot learn from a lesson that arrives before you have the context for it. The first 3 falls were the context. The 4th was the lesson." Bruce looks at him. He says, "You planned the sequence." Sombat says, "All teaching is planned, even teaching that looks spontaneous." He says, again. The 5th knockdown is different from the others, because Bruce almost avoids it. He reads the hip load. He moves to the outside. He is in the position that the hip reading should put him in for the counter. Somtat adjusts in the middle of the technique, not a different technique, the same technique, adjusted in the execution, the arm traveling a slightly different path than the hip load would have predicted, accounting for the slip by finding the position the slip was heading to. The adjustment is 2 inches. In those 2 inches is the difference between the technique missing completely and catching Bruce on the chin as he moves into the position the adjustment anticipated. He goes down a 5th time. This one, he does not get up from immediately. He kneels on one hand for several seconds, his head down, working through something internal. The 3 students at the edge are not breathing. Bruce looks up at Sombat. He says, "You adjusted in the middle." Sombat says, "Yes." Bruce says, "You read where the slip was going and changed the technique's endpoint to meet it." Sombat says, "Yes." Bruce says, "That requires reading my response before my response is complete." Sombat says, "Yes." Bruce says, "How?" Sombat says, "Your right shoulder drops slightly when you commit to a slip to your left. It is a small movement. It happens before your weight fully shifts. It tells me where the slip is going before you have finished going there." Bruce says, "My shoulder." Sombat says, "Your right shoulder. When you are moving left, it drops. I have been watching it since the 1st exchange." Bruce says, "And you waited until the 5th exchange to use it." Sombat says, "I needed you to almost read me first. If I had used it earlier, you would have learned a narrower lesson. You needed to almost succeed before understanding how the success was being prevented. Bruce gets to his feet. He is slower than before, not from injury but from the accumulated work of 5 hard exchanges on a training area on a hill outside Chiang Mai. He says, "My right shoulder." He tries the motion himself, slowly, feeling it, finding the drop. He finds it. He says, "That is deep." Sombat says, "Yes." He says, 19 years deep. Sombat says, "The depth is what makes it useful to you and difficult to change." He says, "Again." The 6th knockdown Bruce sees coming and cannot stop. He sees the hip load, he moves with it, he does everything correctly, and Sombat simply flows with the movement, never fully committing to the original direction, finding the adapted angle, and the elbow arrives at a position Bruce has moved into rather than away from. He goes down hard. This time, he stays down for 10 seconds, counting them. When he comes up, Sombat says nothing. He waits. Bruce says, "You're not committing fully to the initiated technique." Sombat says, "No." Bruce says, "You're initiating it to produce a response, and then adapting to the response." Sombat says, "Yes." Bruce says, "Every exchange has been teaching me to read your initiation. Once I started reading it, you started using my reading as the setup." Sombat says, "Yes." Bruce says, "My reading became predictable." Sombat says, "All skill becomes pattern. All pattern becomes readable. A technique that works produces a response. The response produces a counter. The counter becomes the real technique." He says, "You have been developing your reading for 19 years. It is real, and it is good. It is also a pattern. When someone understands the pattern, your reading becomes a tool for them." He says, "What do you do with this information?" Bruce says, "I have to make my reading less predictable." Sombat says, "How?" Bruce says, "By not always responding to what I read. By sometimes reading the initiation and not reacting, to create uncertainty about whether I have read it or not." Sombat says, "Yes." He says, "You knew this." Bruce says, "In theory." Sombat says, "Now you know it in the body." He says, "One more." The 7th exchange begins differently from the others. Bruce does not move first. He stands in the center of the training area, and he does not attack, and he does not react, and he simply watches Sombat with the quality of attention that is the most consistent thing about him. Sombat watches him back. 15 seconds pass. The 3 students at the edge of the training area look at each other. Then Sombat moves. He comes forward with the low kick, the Muay Thai kick, to the thigh that the discipline is known for, thrown with the hip rotation that carries the shin into the target, with force that compounds itself on a conditioned leg. Bruce moves to check it, shin to shin, the check he has used to absorb kicks throughout this session. But this time he does not just check. In the moment of contact between his shin and Sombat's shin, his right hand moves with a counter that uses the contact point as a reference and travels along the line that the contact has established towards Sombat's exposed head. It is a real strike, the first real strike Bruce has thrown in 7 exchanges. Sombat moves his head. The strike grazes his temple, not a knockdown, not even a solid hit, but contact. The first contact Bruce has made on Sombat. Sombat steps back. He looks at Bruce. Then something happens that the 3 students have never seen in their time training here. Sombat smiles, not a performed smile, the genuine small smile of someone who has just received something they find satisfying. He says, "You waited." Bruce says, "Yes." Sombat says, "You allowed the kick because you had read it early enough to absorb it and counter from the contact." Bruce says, "I stopped trying to avoid the technique and started using the technique." Sombat says, "Yes, the contact itself as a tool." He says, "That is what I wanted you to understand." He says, "The discipline is not about avoiding contact, it is about using contact. The body that can absorb what is sent at it and use the receiving of it as part of the sending back is a different body from the body that only tries to avoid." He says, "That is what the 7 falls were teaching you." He says, "Not that you are less skilled than you thought, that the body learns through receiving, not through avoiding." Bruce looks at him. He says, "I came here thinking the lesson would be about my reading skill." Sombat says, "Your reading skill is real. That is not the lesson." Bruce says, "The lesson is what to do when the reading is used against me." Sombat says, "The lesson is that the body that can only avoid has a smaller vocabulary than the body that can also receive. Receiving is a skill. Absorbing and using is a skill. The 7 falls were 7 words in that vocabulary." Bruce says, "I've been building a system around not being hit." Sombat says, "It is a good system. It has gaps." Bruce says, Receiving is one of the gaps. Sombat says, yes. He says, a body that cannot receive cannot fully teach someone else to receive, and the receiving is the thing that most practitioners need most to develop. He looks at Bruce. He says, your system has excellent theory about intercepting, about being early, about finding the space before the technique. He says, what does your system have for the moment you are not early enough? Bruce is quiet for a moment. He says, less than it should. Sombat says, yes. He says, now you know what to build. They sit at the edge of the training area as the afternoon light changes from amber to something cooler, the sun moving behind the teak trees. The 3 students have brought water. They sit nearby, not pretending to be somewhere else. Sombat allows this. He allows it because what happened in the training area was instruction, and the instruction does not end when the active practice ends. Bruce says, the right shoulder drop, when I slip left. Sombat says, yes. Bruce says, how long to change it? Sombat says, longer than you would prefer. Bruce says, months. Sombat says, the shoulder drop is 19 years old. The correction requires building something that does not yet exist in the body to replace something that exists in every movement you make. 6 months before it is meaningfully smaller, longer before it is reliable. Bruce says, I'll work on it. Sombat says, you should work on it with honest training partners, not partners who cooperate, partners who will use it on you the way I used it on you today, until the using of it stops working. Bruce says, yes. They are quiet for a moment. Bruce says, the pattern of reading, how it becomes predictable. Sombat says, yes. Bruce says, I've been teaching students to read initiation. I haven't been teaching them what to do when someone reads their reading. Sombat says, now you can. Bruce says, because I know what it feels like. Sombat says, you know what it feels like to be put down by someone who read your reading. That is knowledge that exists in the body now. You can give that knowledge to students because you have it. He says, teaching is the transmission of what the body knows, not what the mind knows. The mind can learn from books and films and descriptions. The body can only learn from experience. He says, today, you gave your body 7 experiences it did not have before. Bruce says, 7 falls. Sombat says, 7 lessons. Bruce says, I couldn't have learned them any other way. Sombat says, no. Bruce says, thank you for being willing to teach them the way they needed to be taught. Sombat says, I was not certain I would be willing. Bruce says, what changed your mind? Sombat says, when you came to the entrance and bowed, and I did not bow back, and you did not react with pride. He says, most people react with pride when the expected acknowledgement does not come. You looked at me with curiosity instead. You wanted to understand why, not to defend against it. He says, curiosity is teachable. Pride is not. I decided you were teachable. Bruce says, I'm glad you decided that. Sombat says, you got up 7 times. Bruce says, yes. Sombat says, that is also teachable. Getting up is a skill. Many people do not know this. They think getting up is automatic, a natural response. It is not. Getting up requires a decision. The decision is easier the more times you have made it before. He says, you have made it many times before today. Bruce says, yes. Sombat says, it showed. The light is changing toward evening now. The roosters somewhere in the trees are making their early evening sounds. The spirit house near the entrance holds its offerings. Bruce says, I want to come back. Sombat looks at him. He says, the shoulder drop needs work that my regular training partners cannot provide in the same way. I would like to come back and work on it here. Sombat says, when? Bruce says, I can be back in 2 weeks. Sombat says, I am here every morning, 6 o'clock. Bruce says, I will be here. Sombat says, bring different clothes. The ones you are wearing are now part of the training area. Bruce looks at his shirt, which has acquired the specific character of packed earth, ground into fabric across 7 falls. He says, yes. He stands. He brings his hands together and bows. This time, Sombat bows back, not the full deep bow of someone acknowledging a superior, the specific bow of one serious person to another, given cleanly and without flourish. Bruce picks up his jacket from the edge of the training area and walks toward the entrance. At the entrance, he turns once and looks back at the compound, at the wooden buildings in the training area and the spirit house, at Crew Sombat, standing in the center of the packed earth, where 61 years of teaching has happened. Then he turns and goes down the hill. Nong says, quietly, to Preacha beside him. He got up every time. Preacha says, 7 times. Nuong says, Crew didn't make it easy. Preacha says, Crew never makes it easy. Chai says, from the other side, did you see the last one? He used the kick. He absorbed it and used it. Preacher says, yes. Chai says, that's what Crew has been trying to teach us for a year. Nuong says, he understood it in one session. Preacher says, he understood it in 7 falls. They are quiet for a moment. The light is fully evening now. Sombat says, from the center of the training area, without turning, clean the training area before you leave. They go to clean the training area. Bruce came back, 2 weeks later, and the week after that. He came back 4 times total before his schedule took him out of Thailand permanently. What changed in his system across those 4 sessions was not any specific technique. Sombat never tried to teach him Muay Thai. That was not the point, and both of them understood it was not the point. What changed was the vocabulary for receiving. The recognition that a body that could only avoid contact had a smaller range of options than a body that could absorb and use contact. The understanding that the 7 falls had given him material to transmit to students that he could not have given them without having experienced it. The shoulder drop changed too. It took longer than 2 weeks. It took months of deliberate work, with honest training partners who used it on him every time they saw it, which was every time, for the first 6 weeks, and then decreasingly often, as the correction built itself into the initiation at a level below conscious movement. It never disappeared completely. It is still there if you know where to look, a small amount of information the body gives before the technique arrives, but it is smaller than it was before the hill outside Chiang Mai, and it is smaller still than it was after the first of the 4 sessions. Crew Sombat Therawat is still on the hill outside the city in this story, still teaching, still here every morning at 6, still waiting for students who will get up after the fall and look at him with curiosity instead of pride. Subscribe if this story was worth your time. Tell me in the comments what you think Bruce was thinking between the 5th fall and the 6th. Not what he said, what he was thinking. I read every one.